It says this Hangout on Air is live, so here we are. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Ed.
I think this is the normal, mostly the normal crew, except we have a new person joining us this month. Michael, care to
My name is
tell us about yourself?
Michael Brown. I'm primarily a FileMaker developer. I end up doing MacAdmin sort of more as a favor to people than anything else.
That's how I feel about it.
And I decided to show up and see what this is about.
How did you hear about it, by the way?
Meetup.
Okay.
I'm on your Meetup page
We,
and have been for a long time.
yeah, we post this a few different ways. So, yes, like you found out about it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot in common. It's really funny. I find this, these two worlds sometimes don't cross as much as they should. You know, I find developers that I follow on Twitter will say like, oh, how do I do this thing? And it's like something do all the time. It's like, wow, that's really basic. And then sort of vice versa. You know, some admin will say, like, oh, how do I get the current time system? And you're like, oh, come on, right? Like, so these two worlds feel like they should collide a lot more than they do sometimes. But, yeah, it's nice to see. And again, especially, I think, for someone who's doing FileMaker, what would you say your average customer size base is, right?
It's very small, 2, 3, 4 people.
Yeah, so you probably end up doing a lot of the IT kind of
I do lots of,
responsibilities. You
right.
probably install the FileMaker server.
the largest group I ever supported was 75.
Okay, yeah. So
And,
do you have
also-
a particular industry you focus on?
tends to be nonprofits.
Oh, all right. That's pretty cool, actually.
And I also get phone calls from friends of friends of friends. Yeah, okay, I'll answer your question.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about this month are the challenges that people face in the Apple world when you are international. And I know this bites us a little bit, sort of in the butt sometimes, when Apple doesn't always have the same SKUs available in every country. Not only is it maybe not available, like the Apple Watch is not available in every country around the world right now, but even for us ordering MacBooks, the 15-inch MacBook Pro Retina is not the same SKU in every country because they might have a different keyboard or something specific for that country. Something I actually found out recently is that the OS looks at the hardware and installs itself as the default language. When I was in London 2 years ago, I had to swap out my machine because it died. So I have this British keyboard, Air, and I recently nuked and paved it. And you know, it's underlining things in red that I'm
It'd be
writing.
silly to do it by IP, so doing it hardware based.
Yeah, but I'm like,
guess they
I spelled that word right. Why is it underlining it in red? Oh, yeah, you're looking at all the dictionaries are British dictionaries. So I looked at my keyboard and said, this is a British keyboard, which kind of caught me by surprise. I had forgotten about that. But there are all these other challenges. And then, of course, there's the challenge of internationalizing your software when you deploy a piece of software around the world, which I don't think we do a great job with here. We try sometimes. I know we have internal stuff. Yeah, we don't do a great job of it, mostly because Google says, "Oh, internally we're an English-speaking company." So that's the sort of the default. We had this effort where we were going to try to internationalize some things by getting people from different countries and give us the internationalizations. And then in some cases, if it was open source software, we could contribute those translations back to the open source community, and then just we could not muster up the interest for getting people to translate these things. So I know that was a bit of a challenge. Anyone else doing international stuff? I think Vic and his partner in crime, who shows up here sometimes, they run these international galleries, art galleries. I don't know how much that bites them. I would imagine that the smaller you are, the easier it would be just to, we're just going to buy everything in the US and we'll ship some stuff over. But when you're at the scale of Google, you can't quite do that. You need to source this stuff locally. Anyone else dealing with that at all?
Too bad Alistair's not here. He had a Japanese sport monthly or something.
He had a what?
Japanese sport monthly.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Well, that's exactly what we were trying to do.
That's
We
one of the
couldn't
things
get
we
any
were trying.
support from anybody.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
If you have any insight, anyone, what was the approach doing that? Was it sort of,
I think he got his way.
Yeah, well, his wife. So, yeah.
well, technologically, what was the approach? Like, do they have a strings pack and
Yeah.
they, okay.
Yeah, Apple has a really nice approach to this.
Yeah.
There are even some companies, I forget who they are now, but there are these 2 or 3 companies that I know of that you can just send them your Xcode project.
Yeah.
They'll do all the translations for you and send it back, and you just dump that strings file into your Xcode project and say, hey, it's internationalized. Of course, you have to be smart enough to have use things like auto layout, things like that, because as those string sizes change between languages, you don't want to look all
Might
messed
wanna-
up or
Audit your GUI a little bit.
yeah, or have the string kind of go past the bounds of
Yeah.
the window and you can't read the whole thing. So yeah, I mean, there are some other things to think about with that, but you need to get someone to do the translation. I don't know if there are any crowdsourced translations. That seems like it would make
Most of the-
sense.
Like open source projects I see have, oh, there it is, 10 bugs in GitHub and 0
No one wants to
attention,
do it. Feels like that.
They're
Should just
even-
be like a right case for like, yeah, of course, maybe I'm not going to be doing pull requests for technical stuff, but hey, I can translate your code or your strings. But yeah,
You
you're
also
right,
think that
those-
a lot of strings are the same,
yeah,
right? Like everyone needs to know what quit is and all these different languages.
yeah. I guess the OS covers that. A lot of it.
Well, I guess
If I'm running my OS in Spanish, the OS menus will
Right.
figure that out.
every dialogue about that though.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I didn't know how much of a problem that was for anyone, but I know it's something that comes up from time to time. With people I talk to and certainly at Google, like just sourcing things from Apple. It's like, yeah, we want this thing. Oh, well, that thing is 12 different things based on where you're ordering from. And then we actually had, sorry. No. Then we actually had someone asked 2 questions in advance. How do folks restrict VPN to only company computers? I know our answer, and both of his questions are security questions. That's always a bit frustrating because security is one of those things that's not one size fits all. So you have to kind of weigh your risks and figure out what makes sense for you. For us, we're restricting it with certificates. I would assume that's the most common approach. Everyone decides. Do you have a feeling on that?
Yeah, the client certificates are like indispensable for what we use it for. We basically use it to control all the access, including
Sure,
the
but
machine should have.
VPN in particular, and I would imagine you'd be able to use certificate-based authentication with any Cisco VPN. I don't know if OS10 server has it, but it feels like, yes, I'm going to give out this certificate as a token that represents you work for my company. How you restrict that, I don't know. I mean, I know that was a challenge for us. Apple had this bug where you could, even if you marked it as non-exportable in the system keychain, you could still export certificates and things from the keychain. I mean, people could always just copy over the entire system keychain. I guess other ways to lock that down might be like 2-factor auth type devices.
Just put it in the TV.
Smart cards.
2006.
I mean, passwords, is kind of losing the battle.
Adding the serial number to the certificate.
Yeah, that might be a way to do it. That's certainly a
Well, I think
way.
it's also the kind of question, like you need the question itself, how do you restrict VPN access to particular computers? Like, so is the worry that someone's going to install the VPN on their personal machine and that's a problem? Is the worry that somebody is going to pretend, someone who isn't an employee at all is going to pretend that they are an employee and try to access the VPN using stolen credentials? like there's different things that you have to protect against. I would recommend Harold Wagner and Jan Monch did a presentation on, is it called Beyond Corp?
Yeah,
I didn't want to say that out loud
Publicly.
in case it wasn't called
Yeah,
There's
publicly,
been a bunch of papers recently, more expanding on it.
which is about,
There was one in the ACM, I think, right?
yeah, which is about how you can gain a level of assurance that a particular machine is the machine you think it is, right? And it's part of Google's goal is to not have VPN at all, ever, and not to privilege the corporate network in any way. So that the important thing is that you're using the machine we think you should be using, and you're the person we think you are. What network you're on is trivial. But it is a pertinent to this discussion, even just VPN, because it's about how do you ascertain the identity of a particular computer. I think for most purposes, two-factor is a good enough answer. But if you're really afraid, like people are going to,
Right.
put the VPN on their personal laptop, and you don't want that to happen, then two-factor is not going to help that problem.
Right. So two-factor plus a machine certificate, and then you add a layer on top of all of your management tools reporting to something central, and you can take the signals from that, and if the signals go off the rails, you revoke the machine certificate on the server side, and then that forces a sort of a reevaluation of things.
That's fair enough, but that's complex.
Sure.
Well,
Well, the thing,
infrastructure.
there's no simple. You have the simple things that are easily, well, not easily, that are more
Well,
easily circumvented.
Well,
You could probably buy an off-the-shelf VPN solution that does two-factor off.
Right.
Imagine.
Right.
So, or
And
certificate.
That's easy.
And then it's slightly
Yes.
more complex to get, certificate off on top of that. And it's even more complex to add sort of an inference engine behind the whole scenes to track everything.
so you have to
These are
figure out,
all layers.
And if you're
Second.
really worried, just don't computer.
don't compare.
That's the answer. If you're really worried about this, but that's what I think I started with saying that any security question is sort of a risks and
Yeah, so
So the security engineer once told me that the only secure computer is one that's been powered off, encased in concrete, and right.
and even then
even then, it could be dug up.
should have been smashed first or something.
You're in a Faraday cage.
Very different parity.
Yeah, I mean, I Google, like I just said, what kind of advantage having like this sort of backend inference like service that implies whether a machine is owned or not, depending on the management source, but just for like personal VPN that I've used and set up for myself, usually just short-lived client certificates issued to machines, say for like 1 month or 3 months, is what I would do. And then when those credentials expire, they would have to install a new credential onto their machine to continue using the VPN, which has worked well for me. It could work well for others as well.
Right, it just really depends on what's the threat you're trying to avoid.
Right.
I mean, I think Google is privileged in the resources we can put towards this security stuff, but we're also in an extremely intense security position that most people aren't in. Like, that we have things to worry about that most companies don't have to worry.
True. And then the next question is also a security question, so also sort of a weigh your risks type question. In companies that have large numbers of developers, do you restrict local admin rights? And if so, how? And I'll open that up to anyone because we really don't restrict that. Because
At all to anyone.
we've kind of thought about it in the past and we've run some experiments and it was almost never worth it. But again, it really depends on your entire security posture, whether you think that's worth it. For you, if you have no other controls or access on your machine and you want to restrict admin rights, maybe it makes sense for you. Like we have all these other controls and things in place to stop malware and stop bad actors and blah, 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 that anytime we tried to sort of interfere with people running as root, it just, not running as root, having admin rights causes more problems and headaches and questions and things along those lines.
Like a lot of times it was even simple things which have, they might have workarounds, but it's I need to change the time zone for that travel. And of course, admin rights. You can work around that with things, but it's just it's 1,000 little, well, not 1,000, hundreds of little tiny changes like that that just get annoying. Then you start working around and punching holes in the thing, and you do this and run this command and add this profile, and then you just like.
So not to say that we'll never do that, But at this point in time, we're not chasing that down. I know people do chase that down. I know on my home personal machine, I don't run with admin rights, but I have an admin account that I can always use when it prompts me for something. But then that said, I also have a machine at home that sits under my TV as my media center. It's not connected to the internet at all, and I have no password on it. So that's the most lovely machine in the world to use. You walk up to it, it's like, what's your password? Return. And it opens up. Like, that's how it should be in some ways. But again, there's
What if your face was your password?
my voice is my password.
Your voice?
Well, if you're a good enough security engineer, all machines are like that.
Yeah.
Yours is everyone's.
Everything's open source if you try hard.
I wonder, would this perspective change for you guys if you were the ones answering support tickets? Because one of the reasons I want to lock down machines is not because I'm afraid of, somebody installing something malicious, but because most of my users are not technical at all. So I'm really, I do things like allowing them to change the time zone or add or remove printers and things like that. But beyond that, everything there is limited. And it's because if it's not, I'll get, 10% more support tickets.
So, I mean, we're not immune to that effect, right? So we will end up answering support questions. And at some point, if it's causing enough of a problem, our support org will come to us and say, all these people with Macs are coming up and causing us problems and help us stop this, right?
But I would say also they're the last people who want us to take admin rights away. Like in our situation,
Sure, right.
They're-
Yeah, that's what I was to say. I think in our situation, it would be more burden on the support org if we took away admin rights, because all these little small things that all of our users would like to do, that then go to support org to have someone who has admin rights to
Sure.
get admin rights.
Now, there was a point in time where we were experimenting with opting people into, letting people opt out of having admin rights or not, and we would turn it off for almost half the company, right? Like sales or marketing, and probably not have a problem with that. But one thing that security has shown us kind of recently, because as we do try to add new controls one way or the other to our machines, the engineers are always the ones who scream the loudest and say, well, I know what I'm doing. I don't need these controls. I don't need any of this management stuff. But when you look at machines that have gotten infected with malware, it's pretty equal across engineering or sales or finance or legal or whatever. So being a smart engineer doesn't mean you always make great decisions and you're immune to getting malware or doing something intentionally or unintentionally foolish. So, like I said, sometimes we look at these experiments to say, well, we can't remove admin rights from everyone, but maybe just removing it from a subset of the population helps to some degree. So yeah, I don't know if removing admin rights would cause more tech walk-ups or not. I'm not sure. I think what you're saying is take away admin rights so people don't get themselves into trouble.
Yeah. For developers, these days, if you're a developer, it doesn't matter really what you're doing it in a VM anyway.
Yeah, it's depending. Yeah.
I mean, if you're developing OS 10 or iOS apps, you're probably doing it directly, but if you're doing server stuff, it's probably going to be
Yeah.
talk to the VM.
Right, and even if it's in a different most of the stuff you develop on, you don't need admin rights. Unless you're developing and then trying to install somewhere protected, but just don't do that.
kernel extension.
Sure. If you're doing kernel extensions, you should probably have that.
That you probably should be doing in VM so another time to blow up your machine.
Russell had a lot of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've had to support a lot lately is machines that are directly connected to some sort of machinery, like a 3D printer or something like that. And those users want admin rights specifically because those machines they need some sort of interaction with the hardware that's attached to them. But at the same time, I was sitting in a meeting where one of these departments was talking about, this was a Windows machine, so not a Mac machine, but they were talking about how the vendor VPNs into their machine to upgrade the software. And it's, first we're all like, hold on, how are you doing this? Are they VPNing into our network?
Oh, no.
And
Yeah, I guess there have been a lot of those cases where this remote access software will sort of go out to some central host and
yeah,
let someone else sort of reverse
That's how
tunnel
they're
into your
doing it.
network, which is awful.
I mean,
But that said, it sounds like they've shifted the burden of having a local person have to do this to the vendor,
yeah.
who might be doing it as part of their contract or whatever parts of the software is. So I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know. I guess you could put it on that machine off, so it doesn't have access to the rest of the network.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be mad, I don't know.
Then you're going to annoy a whole separate different set of
Maybe, yeah,
people.
no, I don't know, like, we have 3D printers here, and you pretty much put your project on a USB stick. Go downstairs, hook it up. and print
But
it.
I would,
they're explicitly not connected.
Yeah,
they're not connected to the corporate network, yeah.
right.
I mean, that's what we end up doing, I think, typically, is banishing anything like that to some other virtual network.
Right.
And I don't know if that's could easily not be a useful solution. I mean,
Yeah, possibly. I don't know particularly that situation, but
It depends on how many- like if you're spending all day designing things on one machine and putting on another machine, it might be useful to have a connected, which is this really good. But if it's just a one-off and once in a while. Yeah, different processes.
my HP Jet Direct box, and put it on the 3D printer.
what was the original question?
It was about restricting admin rights.
Oh, yeah.
Developers especially.
Yeah, so yeah, to developers are, again, from our perspective, developers are always our biggest challenge for a number of reasons. They will be the first people to notice that we rolled out some piece of software in the background that never has a UI. They're like, my machine is 0.003% slower today. What'd you guys do?
Damn, that was being used 20% more today.
Yeah, so, oh, I build Chrome every day and it takes 15 minutes. Today it took 15.3 minutes. Right, so, okay. So, yeah, developers are always our big challenge. And as we look to lock down machines, usually we roll it out to everyone but developers until we come up with a solution that will satisfy developers. We don't have a great answer for that.
What I'd say is probably removing admin rights is not sort of the security panacea that I think a lot of people wish it would be. Given that
Yeah.
it causes such an inconvenience, it takes away so many features, and a developer literally has to control his or her machine completely. Well, again, some developers.
Some developers.
I
Not all
mean,
developers.
if
But
you
also-
can take away admin rights, it does stop an entire class of attacks.
I'd say
But-
mitigates it.
I agree with you that
Mitigate.
it probably is more pain than it's worth.
Yeah, we encountered, I'd say, 3 types of people. People who said, oh, well, and people who got annoyed, and then people who said, okay, now it's my task to compromise this machine.
Yeah,
To get their admin rights back.
Right.
Exactly.
I have to say that's one place I feel really lucky working at Google is our security team has sort of enforced a lot of these things. So we're not the bad people, right? Like, if someone does screw up the management tools in an effort to like rid themselves and like get a more vanilla machine, well, guess what? They just lost all their access. And right, but that's not us doing that. That's sort of like this security team. We're not the bad people here.
Security wizards.
Yeah, like so. Overriding management tools for us means you lose access to a lot of things. But that again, that's very complicated infrastructure that we're lucky to have.
I think I'd look at a lot of mitigations before moving the admin rights to improve the security posture of any fleet, especially a fleet of developers. Like Santa is a great example. Like binary whitelisting, I know may seem infeasible or impractical to a lot of small enterprises, but it's actually extremely effective because it's going to prevent your users from running things that you either know are bad or that are unsigned questionably bad.
I would agree.
I'm not crazy on antivirus, but that's certainly an option to use in certain places. I mean, that's all in addition to the standard kind of like your machine is managed to get software updates. There's some logs that are being exported or collected from machines to detect compromise. Just speaking from a personal perspective, like again, taking away admin rights is probably one of the last things I would do, and only super hyper paranoid.
I would say it would be much better to spend time, instead of working on admin rights, is working on keeping all of your machines up to date.
Yeah,
Releases as soon as possible.
Sure.
I mean, obviously there's many cases in the random app isn't compatible with another version that sometimes you're just screwed, but you're much better served security-wise, specifically speaking security-wise, to as soon as the point release is updated, make sure everyone gets it and installs it within, a few weeks.
Yes.
Within a few days if possible. And then, and the major OS releases, a couple of months. Just, go as quickly as you can. Or quicker than you think you are able to. It's even better.
Yeah, it depends who your developers are. I mean, if you're managing a school lab with 100 Macs and you have, teenagers coming in there every day and messing with the Macs, yeah, of course they do admin rights. Like they probably don't need it.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, of course, binary blacklisting on those machines is probably way overkill. But for developers with their own individual Macs working on their own individual work, I think it's just such an impetus to take away their admin rights and prevent them from working. So that would kind of be my answer. Is seek alternative. Make sure everything else is already secure enough before you look at that.
Yeah, totally agree. And speaking of keeping patched and up to date, did everyone see this?
Bad luck.
Not bad luck. The messages bug. Messages bug on OS 10, where a JavaScript link will be executed, and so if you use messages on OS 10, it's still it's still parsing JavaScript, and you could get home remotely with someone sending you a message, which is pretty terrifying. But that's fixed in 10.11.4. Right. So Apple patched it.
Like I said about
people start talking about it. Oh my God, there's this bad thing, and you go, oh my God, oh, it's patched.
Which happened first?
What's that?
Was it out before the patch?
Yes. I mean, the patch was out before people were talking about it. Now, that's not always the case. Of course, there are 0 days. There are people who are just like, Apple's taking too long. I'm telling the world about this. Or they just want to be famous at Black Hat or any of these security cons, and they just go present about it. It's going to happen. I think that's the other takeaway from, or for security talks, is that you should kind of just always pretend some subset of your machines are compromised. What are you doing to quarantine and mitigate when the machines do get compromised? And what do you do for cleanup, right? Like, there are yes, we all want to think our Macs and iOS devices are really secure, and Windows and Linux and whatever else, but go look at the release notes when they send out a point update at all the things that were fixed. You went, oh, there were 5 remotely exploitable, code paths or things along those lines. So, especially like the messages bug was, guess what? I can own your machine through sending you a message with the JavaScript link in it. So, I think sometimes it can be really tough to then kind of go back and, did I get owned anywhere along those lines? How do you know? So detection and quarantine is probably, I don't know, I don't want to say it's an equal strategy to try and defend it off, but it's just as an important part of your security strategy. So that's always fun.
That bug was hilarious. I think the Palm Pre had that bug years ago, and I'm surprised that no one took lessons from that. Like, why does a chat client need to parse JavaScript? That just seems crazy.
I assume they're just using WebKit.
Yeah.
And they just didn't turn that off.
I expect there wasn't a explicit decision in the meeting.
Right.
iMessages should really parse JavaScript again. I think it was just a side effect of.
Really, because I could totally see an Apple product manager saying, this would be a great idea. What? I can draw smileys in my message?
Yeah.
Ship it. Just shut up and ship it.
iOS was never effective, so that's good to know. There are so many more of those. But then again, there are people who claim iMessage is horribly broken, so I give up.
Kind of the funny bit about iMessage is like everybody talks about how secure it is on iOS, but if you're using it on a Mac, it's just it saves everything to a SQLite database. So you
Yeah.
can just go and read somebody's messages. If you have physical access to the machine.
Physical And it's not file vault.
Yeah.
That's sort of step one in your security strategy, just encrypt everything.
Well,
I think.
You need access to the machine.
Yes.
So it it doesn't class the machine.
Yes.
So bar
But
still.
it's a lot easier.
We had cases with students where we actually had to go and read through their history because of bullying and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so go find out how to parse those messages. And then
Huh. Wow. Yeah, that's a position I don't envy. I assume, like, I'm out of date with whatever rules there are around working with students, but I'm sure there are a lot of
yeah, well,
restrictions.
there are things like they'll send messages to each other on phones, but then they're not allowed on their phone on the school network. So they open up their laptop. And,
They're not allowed on the school network, but they all have message or SMS or whatever. So
yeah,
I'm sure they're all downloading WhatsApp and all these other third-party chat clients anyway. So that's got to be. I remember I was working with a school on a consulting basis before I joined Google. So this is 9-10 years ago, and someone came into the school and was like outside expert on internet security, and they were talking about, always put your computer in the family room so you can kind of watch what your kids are doing. This was a K through 12 school.
that's still the advice today.
That's still the advice, but even at the time, this was like before the iPhone, but like kids still were getting smartphones, 3G phones. It's like game over. Like what?
Yeah.
Howard, I don't understand.
Right. I mean, even like a pre-smartphone still had, like the, W3 web browser or whatever.
Yeah.
The 3GS.
Usually you weren't getting those for your kids.
No, but I mean, but a lot of, just once you get a phone, there's texting.
Yeah.
The whole busy world.
Texting, is that what it's called? Another name for it.
One of the best advice.
Why did you say you didn't like antivirus software?
It's just been my experience that it's not very well designed or written for the Mac platform. Some of the products we looked at, in fact, had like Windows registry keys embedded in the binaries. So clearly they were written not by Mac OS X developers. It's a little disheartening because when it comes to security software, right, the weakest link is what's going to break the whole thing down. I don't know if you're familiar with Google's Project Zero effort to find bugs in all sorts of various software, but there's a very talented engineer called Tavis Ormond who works on it. He has a passion for hating antivirus, or at least that's my interpretation of it. And so once a month or so, you'll see them publishing this bug, and it'll be classified first of all to notify the vendor that it's like, this antivirus software is doing SSL man in the middle, there's no authentication, it uses like passwords, just like these super trivial. If you don't believe me, just look up Tavis Ormond. He's well known in the industry for, I don't want to use the word embarrassing, but pointing out the critical flaws in software security and security software that's
What's his last name?
Ormond? Yeah, Tavis Ormond.
You can just look up Taviso. I'm sure he'll be the first hit. But I think for us, like, antivirus sort of catches this very low-level garden variety malware, which is fine, but at some point, it's an extra thing running on your machine, so it typically has a performance impact. And it's extra code running on your machine, which means there might be a security issue, even though it's security software. This guy, Tavis Ormandy, has pointed out, like, if you have blah, blah, blah antivirus installed on your machine, there's this remotely exploitable code path that that opens up your machine to attack. So
What happens usually is the antivirus software has a heuristics engine, which is just a program that's basically running all the code that's you would otherwise execute on your computer. But of course, the program that's executing these programs is itself susceptible to security errors and problems like that. So in a recent scenario, I remember now, I think he was looking at ESET, and it was basically enough to just receive an email in the mail client, not open it, not click on it, to have your machine just completely remotely owned, giving an attacker, root shell. Just from
right, it wasn't
received-
ESET, but it was something
Sorry, it may not have been
but I think
ESET.
it was also specific to the Windows client. But
Yeah.
still, but the issue with that was, all these antivirus products want to
MailGuard, WebGuard,
yeah, but they also want
AppGuard.
they also want to open up compressed files, right? So now they have their own parsing engine for unzipping, unrawring, unzipping, all these things, and understanding them. And usually there are flaws in those parsers that attackers can exploit. And yeah, like you pointed out, more than just antivirus that scans things on disk, a lot of these products want to insert themselves into your web browser and your mail client and all these places. And yeah, they'll start unzipping these files and looking at them from your mail client without you explicitly saying, yes, I want to download this and open it. It's doing it for you, and game over.
Okay, so my wife walks in here and who's not particularly computer literate and says, I think I have a virus. What do I do?
Use it for more of it. I mean, I would re-image it personally. But I mean,
Depends how paranoid you are.
Well, but I would say our experience has been that if we discover a virus, if our antivirus software alerts us that there's a virus on the machine, our experience is there are several more viruses that the antivirus is missing.
Mhm.
That if we actually have forensic technicians look at the machine, they'll say, oh yeah, well there's 6 other things. The viruses that were installed at the same time from the same package, and the antivirus is not catching or removing any of that. So our general advice is, if you found one thing, image it, because you don't know what you're not finding.
Yeah, I mean, security's hard, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And sometimes it's not worth it, right? Sometimes
What was-
security is worse than disease.
there was some web CMS, might have been Drupal, I don't remember, but I remember reading this story about it. There was this security bug in it that lasted for almost 2 versions of the software, and they didn't catch it. And when they released their latest version, they're like, yeah, if you're on anything earlier, just consider yourself compromised. Just, we know it happened. People figured this out before we did, and just erase and start from scratch. So it's, that's, like Ed said, sometimes you find one thing, you really don't know how big that hole was to let all these other things in. So
Right.
our general advice is have good backups, and at some point just reinstall.
It's like noticing the damp spot on your wall and you peel it open. The whole wall is covered in mold, and the next thing you got to demolish the house. Start that being
this isn't to say antivirus doesn't have its place. I didn't mean to get the
Right,
impression
right.
it's just totally worthless, throw it in the bin. For me, it's totally worthless. I would never install it on my Macs because I feel capable enough to understand what I'm doing with the machine, what I'm clicking on, what I'm installing, how to verify these things. For 99% of users, perhaps it's just you right, like you mentioned, they possibly don't have the technological scope to do that. So for them, perhaps antivirus is a good solution. And I think, like I said, we do run antivirus on our Mac fleet here because a lot of users are not technically well versed in these things, and we need something protecting them from just clicking on whatever Trojan is out there masquerading as a Firefox install. But I think it just goes back to a basic principle in security engineering, which is threat modeling. If your threat is garden variety malware, somebody installing some crapware toolbar on their Mac, by all means go buy antivirus. But if your threat is a three-letter agency or something like that, installing antivirus is probably the worst thing you can do because they have mathematicians and scientists and engineers working full-time to find holes and exploits in the software to attack you. So it's kind of a trade-off, and it depends what you're protecting from whom on what machine.
Right.
So I don't want to say oh, antivirus is bad and just leave it at that. No, it's good, but it's not a panacea to all problems. You can't just install antivirus and say, well, the machine's secure now, my job is done.
Yeah, that's the thing I would echo is sure, it can be worthwhile, but
Mhm.
you can't think of it as the end all. And you need to harden a few things and watch things, and in particular because of these days false negatives, it can lull you into this false sense of complacency where you think, oh, it's covering it. No, it's totally not.
It's just like ogres and onion security is layers.
In your experiences, you guys have such a large sample size. How good is Apple at blocking these things?
You mean like with Gatekeeper? And
Yeah.
those? They're actually pretty good. Like they seem to really focus on Flash.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a whole class of it, of
Yeah.
things that we don't really have to worry about because Apple's doing a pretty good
Yeah,
job.
I mean Apple's doing a pretty good job, right? So Apple has, you know, gatekeepers, right? So they have some of this sort of like malware detection built in, and they're pretty good about keeping that up to date and staying on top of current threats and current versions that are exploitable. What's the I'm trying to remember?
Well, so there's Gatekeeper, which is the quarantine system which prevents you from running things.
Right, but there's a malware damage.
Expert tech?
MRT malware removal
Yeah.
tool.
Yeah, MRT. Right?
There's also XPSec, but one thing to mention about XPSec is it only blocks the initial execution of that. So if you were, for example, to be infected with what's this, the Key Ranger ransomware that was just out a couple weeks ago for transmission. So the XProtect definitions were updated, I think, nearly the same or the next day for it. But unfortunately, if you had already been infected with it, the tool, Apple's antivirus implementation wouldn't have protected you because it doesn't actually actively remove it. Although in some cases they do remove it, like in the case of Flashback in 2012, I think, they actually pushed out a malware removal application, which went and hunted for these files on disk and removed them manually. But I think Apple is just, in my personal opinion, is kind of shying away from that kind of nanny statism approach to making sure you don't get your Mac infected.
Right. Well, it's a tough business. Like,
Yeah.
they either have to do it perfectly or they're going to lose.
And I think even if you go on support.apple.com and you try to search for virus or antivirus, they're very sort of ambiguous about it. They don't want to admit that Macs can get viruses because I think so much kind of banks on this percent. And we in this room all know it's not true, but to so many people asked on the street, if they were to be asked whether Macs get viruses, they'd say no, Macs are safe from viruses. They're totally fine. And I think Apple kind of plays up the perception of it. For good reason. There's less viruses now, maybe not later, but now available for Mac. But I mean, nevertheless, it's a computer that runs code that anyone can write code for. Therefore, you can get viruses. So protect yourself.
Does the ones and zeros the same as
That's
all the
right.
other computers that do the ones and zeros.
I think it's
It has the best ones.
that was big Indian.
Zeros and ones.
Yeah.
All right, did anyone else have questions or things you're struggling with? Wanted to bring up? I haven't gotten questions on the Slack channel. So then,
Usually we have Alistair here, who's always entertaining and a very good converser.
There's that. So then I'll wrap it up with the normal sort of wrap up community events that are coming up. We've Penn State MacAdmin's conference coming up in the end of June, right? June? End of June? Yes, end of June. Last week of June, I think. I'm going to be speaking there, so I'm happy about that. We're talking a little bit about MacTech. Before we started this up, MacTech is in November. It's mid-November this year. I forget the exact dates, like 17th through 19th or something like that. But yeah, I'm starting to gear up for putting together another year of MacTech. So I'm happy to talk to people about ideas and talks. We'd love to have all of you speak and be involved. I'm sure there's some other event I'm missing. Mac Sysadmin is in October.
Mac DevOps.
Yes, Mac DevOps is the week before
Yeah.
Penn State.
20 something. I think.
Yeah, so that one's actually first, and that's one I really want to get to.
It was really good last year.
Yeah, I wanted to go this year, and then I realized it was a week off of Penn State, and I can't be traveling that much. So I will shoot for 2017, getting to Mac DevOps. So Mac DevOps, Penn State.
And WWDC.
I was gonna say, we don't know when
Yeah.
WDC is gonna be. This might be the first year that I don't even go to San Francisco for WDC. I'm not sure.
The remote sessions, I think, are awesome. They're just like being there.
They-
you don't get to talk to the engineers the same way.
They are, this is one of those, everyone works different ways. I know, like, anytime someone says, oh, there's this conference and they're releasing videos, I know I'm never gonna watch the videos. Unless I go to the conference, I know I sit at my machine and start watching the video, and like in 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I got email and I got things to do.
You should do what I do. Just play them while you sleep.
You can absorb it that way.
I didn't say anything about absorbing.
No, okay.
But you have heard them.
It's great for insomnia.
I know words.
But
The best
Today's update on Objective-C.
But the thing with
Swift is
WDC
really
now
good.
is that there's this whole ecosystem that revolves around people who didn't get a ticket. And I know when I went last year, spent the week in San Francisco, I scoped out, like, Apple was really good last year about releasing videos the day that
That's
the
right.
sessions happened. So I just scoped out like 2 or 3 hours every evening in my hotel room, and I said, I'm going to watch the 2 or 3 videos that interest me the most that happened today. And then I would go to events and things at night, and there's AltConf during the day. I went to LayersConf last year, which only took up the 2 days, the first 2 days of WDC. It was its first year. I'm not sure it's the conference for me. I know other people enjoyed it a lot, but there are these events that happen during WDC, so it's still worthwhile. But I think this year I have enough other stuff going on that I probably won't attend. But that was the thing that held me off from Mac DevOps last year. It was a week before WDC, so or a week after. I'm sorry. So it was very close to WDC. Any other events, community things happening?
There's a crypto party happening tomorrow. For those that don't know, it's basically just a lot of nerds get together and talk about photography
That is cool.
or encryption. All
And
sorts
people
of
sign
stuff.
each other's keys.
No one signs
No one
keys
does that anymore.
That used to be
The last time
key
they all
signing
used to
parties.
use
Right. Everyone has a USB key screen plugged into their computer.
Yeah,
I think it's happening at the Resistor in Brooklyn. Sometimes they do it in Harlem, but I've been, I think, twice now, and it's a pretty good crowd.
Resistor is a great makerspace.
I haven't, so I'm
Really
probably
cool.
gonna go check it out
Really.
tomorrow. Yeah, but if you're interested in that stuff, totally get involved with that. It's a good community.
Okay.
I had sort of a question topic
Yes.
kind of thing. So I've been reading the SRE book, which is, if you guys don't know, the Google just released.
It just came out.
The what
you-
book?
It's called the SRE. SRE is the System Reliability Engineer from Google. And it's sort of like, I see it as the follow-up from like Tom Limoncelli's like practice of system administration, except for, the modern way of doing things. And it's really good. But I've
You're the only
only
one in this room who's read it, I
Yeah.
think.
I'm waiting-
I need to read it.
I'm like-
We've lived it.
chapter, yeah, you
Wow.
guys.
No,
I'm like chapter
Yeah.
5.
I'm waiting
in,
for my
so I
free
haven't read it yet, but
Yeah.
it's very good so far. But I always have this like thing where I try to like look at this DevOps movement, like how that fits in. But some of those things don't apply to managing end user machines, or like are just a million times worse, because like if you're dealing with server software that your developers wrote, like you have access to the code and you have access to how it's executed. Versus a lot of times of what we do is, a vendor gives us a binary, and that binary is screwed up in some ways. And there's no way to talk back to the
Just
vendor,
one way.
and you gotta make sure that it works for you.
Well, I think it's a little separate, right? Like, so SREs at Google don't always have authority or the time frame or whatnot to tell developers, the team that they're supporting, to make changes or do anything different with their software. I think, so you're living in a post-DevOps world. We're post-DevOps.
Well,
But to me, the thing that has always been important to me is to see how a company that's running a large fleet of things, like what tools are applicable to you. even at a smaller scale. And I think the one thing that'll always benefit you is automation. And that's sort of the SRE mindset. Like, how do I automate this? How do I not have to manually do this, right? And part of that, I think, sort of the Mac DevOps world, our deployment tools, that's like, you want to package it up, put it someplace, and then just have it go, right? So your vendor gives you some new version of something, you want to package it up, put it in one place, have all the right machines, get it, whatever that means to you, right?
And today that story is pretty good, especially on Macs.
Yeah.
The problem for me, and the biggest time waster sort of, is testing, because you still like how to package import something into Monkey and have it there, and you know that it's deployable for the most part. But it's so hard to tell what the unintended consequences, especially with software, like big one is browsers. And last year I had a big issue with, wanting to update Chrome for people because of X and Y reasons, but then, Chrome disabled the NP API plugins, and a lot of these web apps that our users use, depend on these. So, and the vendor doesn't want to update it because they're like, well, this is what we do. Then you're stuck with like 15 versions of Chrome behind. Because, and so, how do I? First of all, I actually had to roll back that because I didn't realize that Chrome made that change that affected a whole bunch of web plugins. And how do you detect things like that without just checking absolutely everything yourself?
Well, again, I think it depends on your scale. For us, we have this unstable testing, stable tracking. We can roll out in phases, or we can roll out to a certain percentage of the fleet and sort of grow that percent over time. And at some point, you hear complaints and you stop. Don't go.
We don't always hear complaints.
We don't always hear complaints, which can be frustrating.
Part of our automated process is asking for complaints from our various circles as they expand, because sometimes people just don't. They'll use something else. They'll find another way.
We also find that we're not, like as we roll, especially package software out, that the testing population is a particular group of people.
Yeah.
And they just don't use some things. Like, that's our biggest issue with that. I mean, it's not only that they don't complain, but.
And moreover, they're more technically apt.
They're more likely to fix the
They're
problem.
more likely to fix the problem themselves, or blame the problem on their own doing, or something of that sort.
You don't realize that, 19 out of 20 of them solved it, and nobody else in your org is going to be able to do that.
Much happier with, hey, let's roll this out to one random percent of the fleet. But to get back to your point, I think the smaller your organization, the more you're going to have to just have your checklist. Update and then just go through that checklist and make sure things don't.
I mean, I think the SRE answer to the question is, you have to automate as much as you can. You can automate the testing process as much as you can. But I think one of the keys to that whole thing, so Google describes SRE as the approaching reliability as a software problem, right? So everything's a software problem. One element of that is it takes a lot of resources. Like, if you read these books, the SRE handbook, like, the people who wrote that book are parts of huge teams with huge amounts of resources behind them.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, you have to be at that point where you don't feel like you're putting out fires all the time to get to the point where you can fix things in the future that haven't happened yet. Yeah.
It's hard to balance, if you're putting out fires all the time, it feels like you never have the time. But it might be that you should stop putting out the fires, get this other thing done that will make the future fires much less. But that's hard. That's a hard decision to make, because obviously you're working with users who are on fire. So, I'm sorry you're on fire. I have to work on this other thing that doesn't make any sense to you, but it'll make it better, I promise. So let's call it a controlled burn.
Yeah, that can be a tough balance.
It's a really challenging problem. I'm glad you brought this up, because this is something we're actually kind of struggling with from time to time as well, namely that the testing population doesn't always report these problems to us. And I think what basically what we're saying is, unlike the SRE book, and I haven't read it myself, but maybe I could apply some of the principles I know, you can't in a verifiable way guarantee that these Macs are going to be used and will perform in the way that you expect them to 100% of the time. Whereas with a software system, perhaps it's more easy because you've written software and you can write tests for it. You can't write tests for the scenario or describe where NPA plugins get disabled and yourself. Of course, you can write a test for it, but you're going to be writing a million tests for it. So kind of to what Clay said, just when things break, it's important you learn from that experience and you write kind of the tests and verification around that to make sure it never happens again. But unfortunately, with the DevOps sort of work that we do, it's impossible to know until these things actually break. It's very hard to be proactive and look after these problems when they occur. I mean, I would say it's almost impossible. If you have a solution for that, I'd love to hear it because I certainly haven't hypothesized about it myself yet.
My solution is sort of the same thing, which I guess I learned from looking at the factory experiments, is to automate the add it to 1% and grow it to,
Yeah, exactly.
which works. I guess the more users you have, the better it works. But
Right, if you got 3 users,
yeah, same scenario.
1%, well, no one got it.
Also, I think it helps having defined like a release process that you go through that everybody's familiar with and is on board with, and that users know that on this day of the week is when changes go out, and I'm most likely to be affected by something that the administrators of my machine may change. And I know how to escalate this, and I know how to, not kind of spend 3 days in the dark, but know who to go to, who to complain about, and how to get this problem fixed. So I think we spent a lot of time really chiseling away at our procedures and making sure that when there is a problem, we kind of have the post-mortem already ready. We have the template ready to go. Pre-mortem, right?
We're write it ahead of time.
Right.
One of the things that I used to work in a place where I was the support and the system administrator. And so if there was a problem, somebody reported it to me and I knew I screwed it up. But now I work in a place where I'm the system administrator and there's a help desk and they're in a whole different building.
Someone escalates to you.
And somebody escalates to me, but I've been finding that, well, first of all, I have to really make sure I don't screw something up because it'll take days for me to hear it, sometimes weeks. And so making sure that I test twice, 3 times. But this whole feedback loop is much more difficult now than it used to be.
Well, I mean, if you can get a testing rig up and going, I mean, then sort of taking the sort of test-driven development idea and applying it to that. Like, anytime there's a bug, the first thing you do is you write a test to prove the bug, and then you fix the bug. Right? It's this whole test-driven development with code, and that's a good sort of idea to do if you have a test rig up. Like, oh, this thing broke. Well, I'll add a test to make sure this thing doesn't break this way again. That way I can check for it. Or this thing and things like it if I can, but that can be pretty complicated and hard to do, especially on testing image releases and packaging updates. It's much more complicated thing.
Some things are testable, some things just are not. They're just not testable. You know how a user is going to use their machine on, say, the first login when you give it to them is just totally unpredictable. They could go in there and change the time setting to be 10 years in the past and totally screw up the rest of everything. Just screw up everything forever, right?
Yeah.
And like you're not going to write a test for that. You're going to think that's silly. Who would ever do that? But users will do it. Somebody out there will do it. And like you said earlier, with our sample size of a lot of tens of thousands of Macs, we have pretty much seen everything that you can't even imagine people would do. They do, like changing the date back 10 years, just doing something crazy like this. It's just so unpredictable that you have to. I mean, you just kind of have to live with it. Right?
We had someone who said they always would undo the time sync and set their clock ahead 10 minutes, so they'd always be early to meeting.
That's right.
Of course, this was back when they used Kerberos a lot, and that would never work. They tried to get a ticket, and Kerberos was like, you're too far different. I can't do it.
In the future,
right?
Yeah.
It's a situation where like a Mac, the battery dies completely.
Yeah.
So the cloud resets to like the original manufacturing date.
We've very much been into popcorn-driven development.
Yeah.
You eat popcorn and write code. That's it. No
I'm
tests.
on board with that. But
No tests. So yeah, I think it's just automatic.
Follow the Slack channel. One of the things is like there's so many different subsets. Like now there's like the Microsoft Office, and there's so much discussion going on just around Office, and then there's the Adobe installs group, and there's so much discussion around that, and it's great because you pop in, you can ask a question. but it's also very hard to follow. So
Yeah,
It's,
Well, yeah, I think it's hard to follow, but it's easier to follow than it was when it was all of those things only on one channel in IRC, where that was just like a giant, just constant stream of like this 6 conversations going at once that are kind of threaded amongst each other.
yeah,
So the Slack stuff is it's still there's more people on the Slack because it's easier, it's more accessible, I guess, and it is breaking up more into subjects. And some of the things do get like I look at it once in a while, I'm like, I'm not gonna look at this old stuff.
Yeah, as retro as it is, sometimes it makes me wish for more blogs because
sometimes, yeah.
you need something to, shake out the chaff. 'Cause
Exactly.
it's just-
Yeah. But the other thing with blogs or reading, whatever, is sometimes it's just serendipity. It's like you didn't go to ask a question, but you read this thing. Oh, actually, yes, I need that answer, or I will need that.
That was not an answer I did. That wasn't even a question I had.
Yeah.
And I needed the
Like,
answer.
wow, that's really cool. All right.
I didn't know I had that question.
Yes.
and sometimes you'll have a problem and you'll look for it and you'll find a blog post that fixes your problem and you realize you wrote that
You
blog
wrote
post
it.
5 years ago, 6 years ago, I just totally forgot.
That's
You're right.
that's the best part about blogging and sharing. Yeah, I've done that plenty of times before. Or sometimes I'm like, oh, I know I wrote about this. Put it in my search terms like Marzac. And like go find my own article or something that I wrote. It's like, I know I did this. All right.
All right.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks for letting
Thanks
us
everyone.
Thank you very
lining up. See you next month.
See you next month.